The conference hall stretched wide enough to hold representatives from 40 different species. Commander Velthar of the Catharan Empire stood at the center podium, his four eyes scanning the assembled delegates with satisfaction. Behind him, holographic displays showed human settlements scattered across their small corner of space. "The human problem requires our attention," Velthar announced. His translator device rendered his clicking speech into words every species could understand. "They are too emotional, too volatile. They cannot expand into the galaxy while crippled by their feelings." The Silmari delegate raised a delicate hand. Her species resembled tall, willowy beings of blue light. "Are we certain this is a problem? The humans seem happy enough on their worlds." "Happy is inefficient," Velthar replied. "Watch this." The hologram shifted to show footage from a human mining colony. A worker had crushed his hand in machinery. He screamed and collapsed, unable to continue. Other workers stopped their tasks to help him, their faces twisted in concern and sympathy. Production halted for hours. Now observe a Catharan mining operation. The next footage showed one of Velthar's own people suffering a similar injury. The workers simply noted the damage, applied a tourniquet with calm efficiency, and reported to medical. No screaming. No panic. The other workers continued their tasks without pause. Production never stopped. "This is what proper neural regulation provides," Velthar explained. "Every civilized species in this council has learned to suppress unnecessary pain responses, physical and emotional. It is the foundation of galactic society." The Corvasi war chief leaned forward, his massive frame causing the chair to groan. His species looked like bipedal bears covered in metallic scales. "The humans fight well despite their weakness. Imagine if they fought without fear or hesitation. They could become valuable allies. Or dangerous enemies if left to develop on their own," added the Zenthis representative, a creature of crystalline geometry that clicked and chimed when it moved. "Better to guide them now while they still respect us." The Silmari delegate seemed uncertain. "Have the humans asked for this guidance? Removing pain seems cruel." Velthar's mandibles clicked in what might have been a smile. "Pain itself is cruel. We offer them freedom from it. Already, human leaders have approached us seeking our technology. They see how other species operate in space without the crippling weight of suffering. They want the same for their people." This was technically true. Dr. Sarah Chun, one of Earth's leading neuroscientists, had indeed requested information about Catharan neural technology. She had watched her daughter die slowly from a painful disease, helpless to ease her suffering. When she learned that other species could simply turn off pain, she had to know more. The vote was swift. 38 species voted yes. 2 abstained. None voted against. The Galactic Council would offer humanity the gift of neural inhibitors. 3 months later, Dr. Chun stood in her laboratory on Earth, examining the first Catharan neural device. It was smaller than she expected, no larger than a grain of rice. The Catharan medical team had been generous with information. The device would be implanted at the base of the skull, where it could interface with the brainstem and regulate neurotransmitter production. "It will not remove all feeling," explained Kesar. "The Catharan doctor assigned to teach human surgeons the procedure. You will still feel joy, curiosity, satisfaction. But pain, fear, grief, anger will be reduced to manageable levels. You will notice them, acknowledge them, and move forward." "And there are no side effects?" Chun asked. "None. 40 species use this technology. It has been refined over thousands of years." Kesar tilted his head in what Chun had learned was a gesture of sincerity. "Your daughter would not have suffered if you had possessed this technology. No parent should watch their child in pain, helpless to act." Chun felt something twist in her chest. Grief and hope mixed together in a way that hurt. Kaiser was right. If she had been able to turn off her daughter's pain, the last months would have been peaceful instead of agonizing. When can we begin trials? She asked. The first volunteers were carefully selected. Terminal patients who lived in constant pain. Soldiers suffering from severe PTSD. Burn victims who faced years of agonizing recovery. The surgeries were simple, the results immediate. Patients who had screamed at every touch now smiled calmly as doctors examined their injuries. Veterans who couldn't sleep without nightmares now rested peacefully. The media coverage was overwhelming. News channels across Earth showed the miraculous transformations. A man with fourth degree burns over 60% of his body, calmly discussing his recovery plans. A soldier who had watched her entire unit die, now speaking about the experience with clear eyes and steady voice. Within 6 months, the waiting list for inhibitor implants stretched into the millions. Not everyone celebrated. Dr. Marcus Webb, a psychiatrist specializing in trauma, appeared on every talk show that would have him. Pain exists for a reason, he argued. It teaches us. It warns us. It connects us to our humanity. We're talking about fundamentally altering what it means to be human. But his voice was drowned out by the chorus of success stories. People who could finally function after years of suffering. Workers who could perform dangerous jobs without crippling fear. Parents who didn't collapse in grief when their children struggled. The holdouts were called cowards, primitive, clinging to evolutionary baggage that served no purpose in the modern world. Why suffer when you could simply choose not to? Dr. Chun received the implant herself on live television. When the activation switch was pressed, she felt it immediately. The constant low-level anxiety she had carried since her daughter's death simply vanished. The guilt that woke her at 3 a.m. dissolved. She could remember her daughter's death, could access the memories clearly, but the crushing emotional weight was gone. She smiled at the camera. It's like someone turned down the volume on everything that was hurting me. I can finally breathe. Across human space, billions made the same choice. The galaxy watched with approval as humanity joined the community of civilized species. Finally, humans could take their place among the stars without the burden of their excessive emotions. The Kaitheran medical teams filed their reports with the Council. Humanity was adapting well to the inhibitors. Better than expected, actually. Human neural patterns were showing interesting variations in how they integrated with the technology, but nothing concerning. The note about unusual adaptation patterns was buried in a secondary appendix. No one read it. No one thought to ask why evolution had given humans such intense emotions in the first place. Or what might happen when a species that felt everything learned to feel nothing at all. The galaxy had taught humanity to control pain. Soon, they would learn what humanity had truly mastered. 5 years after the first implants, Commander James Rodriguez floated in the dying remains of his ship. Through his helmet visor, he could see Lieutenant Park's body tumbling slowly past, her suit torn open by shrapnel. Beyond her, the rest of his crew drifted in the void, small frozen statues marking where the Zothan pirates had torn through their hull. Rodriguez noted each death with calm efficiency. Park, Chun, Williams, O'Brien, Kowalski. 15 crew members total. He logged their names in his suit's emergency beacon, adding tactical data about the pirate attack patterns. His oxygen had maybe 20 minutes left. The emergency beacon would transmit for another 6 hours before its battery died. He felt nothing about his approaching death. No fear, no regret. The inhibitor at the base of his skull kept everything smooth and manageable. He thought briefly of his wife back on Mars, wondered if she would cry at his funeral, then dismissed the thought as unproductive. But then something strange happened. His hand moved to the back of his neck, fingers finding the small port where the inhibitor could be accessed. Every human knew you could turn the device off temporarily. Doctors did it for surgical procedures, and some people dialed it down when they wanted to feel things more intensely during happy occasions. Rodriguez had never adjusted his. Never saw the point. But now, floating in the dark with nothing but death ahead, some impulse made him press the emergency override. The emotions hit him like a physical blow. Terror flooded his system first, raw and primal. He was going to die. Die alone in the cold dark. Rage followed, burning hot. The Zathan had murdered his crew, good people who trusted him. Grief came last, crushing his chest worse than any lack of oxygen. Park had shown him pictures of her daughter just this morning. Chun had been planning his wedding. All gone. All dead because he had failed to see the ambush. Rodriguez gasped, overwhelmed. His vision blurred with tears. But then something clicked in his mind. The emotions were there, powerful and real, but he could feel the edges of them, the shape of them. He reached back and turned the inhibitor on again. The feelings vanished instantly. Calm returned. He turned it off. Emotions crashed over him, on again. Calm. Off. Emotions. On. Calm. Rodriguez hung in space, cycling the inhibitor on and off, and with each cycle, he understood something profound. The inhibitor hadn't removed his emotions. It had given him a switch. He could feel everything or nothing, and more importantly, he could choose which and when. He turned the inhibitor back on and began reviewing the tactical data with cold precision. Then he turned it off just long enough to let rage sharpen his focus and determination. The pirates were still in the area, looting the cargo. He had one working thruster pack and a sidearm. With the inhibitor, he could float to their ship without fear. Without the inhibitor, he had the fury to do what came next. Rodriguez survived that day. So did 3 of the pirates, though they wished they hadn't. When the rescue ship found him, he was calmly sitting in the pirate captain's chair, surrounded by bodies. He reported the incident with perfect emotional control, then privately went to his quarters and let himself grieve his crew. He wasn't alone in his discovery, Dr. Sarah. Chun made the same realization watching her granddaughter's first birthday party. She had the inhibitor running as usual, feeling pleasant satisfaction as the child smashed cake everywhere. But some part of her wanted more, wanted to feel the pure joy that used to come with family moments. She reached back and dialed down the inhibitor, just a little. The joy rushed in, warm and bright. But unlike before, she could control how much. She could let herself feel overwhelmed with happiness, or pull it back to gentle contentment. She could choose her experience. Chun began running experiments that night. She recruited volunteers who had noticed the same thing. What they discovered changed everything. Human brains were adapting to the inhibitors in ways no other species had. The devices were meant to suppress neural pathways, but human neurology was creating new pathways around the suppression. The inhibitors hadn't lobotomized humans. They had given humans a control panel for their own consciousness. Chun published her findings in the Journal of Neural Adaptation. The papers spread through human space like wildfire. Within months, training programs appeared teaching people how to use their inhibitors with precision. You could dial down fear when crossing a dangerous ravine, turn up aggression when defending yourself, switch off grief to function during a crisis, then turn it back on to properly mourn later. Humans weren't becoming emotionless. They were becoming something the galaxy had never seen before. A species with complete voluntary control over their emotional state. The changes rippled through human society. Human miners worked in conditions that would break anyone else. Pain responses dialed down just enough to function, but not enough to miss warning signs of danger. Human traders negotiated with perfect poker faces, reading other species while revealing nothing. Human explorers pushed into hostile environments, toggling their fear responses to match the situation. When the Zothan Dominion invaded the outer colonies, they expected easy victories. Every species with inhibitors fought predictably. They could work through pain, yes, but they also lacked the emotional drive for true aggression. They were perfect defensive fighters, but poor attackers. Human soldiers were different. The Zathan warriors watched in horror as human troops advanced under fire without hesitation. Fear switched completely off. Then these same humans would close to melee range and suddenly fight with savage fury, rage dialed up to maximum. Minutes later, the same soldiers would calmly treat wounded prisoners with professional medical detachment. It was like fighting an enemy that could be 3 different species in the space of an. Our General Cathrex of the Jathan submitted a formal complaint to the Galactic Council. The humans are using the inhibitors wrong. This was not their intended purpose. They are supposed to suppress emotion, not weaponize it. The Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from across the galaxy watched recordings of human activity with growing alarm. This wasn't what they had voted for. This wasn't civilized suppression of primitive urges. This was something new and terrifying. The Silmari delegate, who had worried about the ethics from the beginning, spoke quietly. We gave them a gift we didn't understand. We assumed they would respond like we did. But humans aren't like us. Valthar of the Catharan demanded his medical team explain. They showed him the brain scans, the new neural pathways, the adaptation that should have been impossible. Human neurology is more plastic than we realized, the lead researcher explained. Their brains don't just adapt to the inhibitors. They incorporate them. They use them as tools. Then we remove the tools, Valthar said flatly. But the Zenthis representative raised a crystalline appendage. And if they refuse removal? What then? Do we force them? We gave these inhibitors freely. We celebrated when they accepted them. The chamber fell silent. On the view screens, human ships were pushing the Zathan back system by system. Human colonies were expanding into regions other species considered too difficult. Human influence was spreading, carried by people who could choose to be compassionate or ruthless, depending on what the moment required. The galaxy was beginning to understand what it had done. They had tried to civilize humanity by teaching them to suppress pain. Instead, they had given humanity the keys to their own nature, and humans had learned to drive. The Catharan medical delegation arrived at New Geneva Station with full diplomatic credentials and a mandate from the Galactic Council. They expected cooperation. They were used to other species deferring to their expertise, treating Catharan medical advances with proper respect and gratitude. Ambassador Liu met them in a conference room that overlooked Earth through massive windows. She wore simple diplomatic robes and a calm expression that never changed. Her eyes tracked them with perfect focus as they settled into chairs designed for various alien anatomies. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice," Valthar began. He had led the original initiative to give humans the inhibitors. Now he would lead the effort to take them back. "Of course," Liu replied. Her smile was professional and exact. "How can humanity assist the Council?" Valthar activated his presentation. Brain scans filled the air between them, human neural patterns highlighted in red. "Your species is using the inhibitor technology incorrectly. The devices were designed to suppress harmful emotional responses, not to manipulate them as tools. We need to examine your population and correct the implementation." Liu watched the presentation without reaction. When it ended, she folded her hands on the table. "I see. And if we decline this examination?" "This is not a request," one of the other Catharan doctors said sharply. The Council voted unanimously. The inhibitors must be removed or properly recalibrated. "Removed," Liu repeated. She turned to look out the window at Earth. "Do you understand what you're asking? 3 billion humans carry these devices. They've built their lives around them. Miners who work in environments that would be impossible otherwise. Doctors who can operate for 18 hours without emotional fatigue. Parents who can stay calm during their children's medical emergencies. They manage before the inhibitors, Valther said. They suffer before the inhibitors, Liu corrected. Her voice remained level, but something sharp entered her eyes. You came to us with a gift. You said it would free us from unnecessary pain. Were you lying? We gave you a tool for suppression, not manipulation. You gave us a neural device and taught us how to turn it on, Liu said. You didn't specify how we should use it once we understood how it worked. That seemed like an oversight on your part. The Silmari delegate had insisted on joining this meeting. She shimmered slightly as she leaned forward. Ambassador Liu, please understand our concern. Humans are changing. You fight differently, trade differently, explore differently than any species we've encountered. Some council members find this frightening. Because we can choose how we feel? Liu asked. Because we've learned to deploy compassion strategically or anger tactically. Every species in the galaxy makes choices. We simply make them more consciously. You make them without authentic feeling, Valther said. You fake emotions. For the first time, Liu's expression changed. She reached back and touched the port at the base of her skull. Something shifted in her face, a subtle relaxation of muscles that had been held just so. Let me explain something about authentic feeling, she said, and now her voice carried heat. I lost my son in a shuttle accident 8 years ago. Before the inhibitor, I couldn't function. The grief was so heavy, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't work, couldn't help my daughter-in-law with her own grief, couldn't be there for my grandchildren. I was drowning in authentic feeling, and it helped no one. She paused, her eyes glistening. With the inhibitor, I can choose when to feel that grief. I can turn it on when I visit his memorial, when I need to remember him fully. Then I can dial it back so I can be strong for my family. Tell me, which version is more authentic? The one who drowns or the one who chooses when to swim? Liu touched her neck again, and the emotional display vanished like someone had flipped a switch. When she spoke again, her voice was perfectly controlled once more. You see? I just showed you real grief, and now I'm showing you tactical composure. Both are authentic. Both are me. I simply choose which version you need to see. The demonstration unsettled the delegates in ways they couldn't quite articulate. The Corvassi war chief growled low in his throat. This is exactly what concerns us. You treat your own feelings as weapons. Everything is a weapon if you're creative enough, Liu said. The difference is we're honest about it. Your species claim to have suppressed your emotions, but you haven't. You've just locked them away where they leak out in unconscious biases and irrational decisions you don't acknowledge. We chose to keep ours and master them instead. Valther's mandibles clicked in agitation. The Council's decision is final. If humanity refuses to comply, there will be consequences. Such as trade restrictions, travel limitations, potentially military action if you're deemed a threat. Liu stood and walked to the window. Below, Earth rotated slowly, blues and greens and whites swirling in familiar patterns. You know what's interesting about threats? They work best against species who feel fear without controlling it. Against us, they're just information to process. She turned back to face them. But let me offer you something else to process. Every species that uses inhibitors receives them from K-Theron medical facilities. You control the supply, the manufacturing, the implementation. You've used this monopoly to maintain your position on the Council for centuries. We are the experts in neural technology, Valther said stiffly. You were, Liu corrected. But now humans understand these devices better than you do. We've improved them, refined them, created new variations you never imagined, and were willing to share. She activated her own presentation. New inhibitor designs filled the air, showing modifications and improvements to the K-Thuran technology. These aren't just human models. These are versions adapted for Silmari neurology, for Kravasi brain structure, for Xanthus crystalline consciousness. We've been developing them for 2 years, working with volunteers from sympathetic species. The Silmari delegate leaned forward, her light brightening with interest. You can adapt them for us? Already done. The question is whether the Council wants to acknowledge that their monopoly is over, or whether they want to start a conflict they'll lose. Velther stood abruptly. This is extortion. This is commerce, Liu replied. We're offering an improved product to anyone who wants it. You can try to stop us through force, but that requires Council unity. I'm guessing several species in this room would rather have access to our technology and support your monopoly. She was right. The Kravasi war chief was already examining the adapted designs for his species. The Silmari looked fascinated by the possibilities. Even the Xanthus representative seemed intrigued. The Council will never accept this, Velther said. Then the Council will split, Liu said simply. Some species will choose progress. Others will choose tradition. That's their right. But understand this. Humanity will not give up the inhibitors. We've learned to master ourselves in ways you never imagined. You taught us to control pain. We learned to control everything that makes us sentient. That knowledge can't be unlearned. She touched her neck port again, and her expression softened into something that might have been genuine sympathy. You meant well, I think. You saw us suffering and wanted to help. But you made the mistake of assuming we'd respond like you did. Humans don't just adapt to tools. We transcend them. You gave us neural inhibitors. We turned them into instruments of self-determination. Liu walked to the door, then paused. The Council meets in 3 days to vote on military action. I suggest you tell them what you've learned here. Tell them that 12 species have already contacted us privately about our adapted inhibitors. Tell them that forcing humanity to remove our devices will only spread our technology faster. She smiled one last time, and it was impossible to tell if the expression was genuine or tactical. You taught us to control pain. Now we're teaching you that you never really understood what that meant. The vote was supposed to be unanimous. The Galactic Council had never deployed its combined military forces against a single species before, but the consensus was clear. Humanity had become too dangerous, too unpredictable. They needed to be contained or corrected. Velther stood at the central podium, confident despite the tension in the chamber. 12 species have pledged their fleets to this operation. We will establish a blockade around human space and demand the removal of all modified inhibitor technology. If they refuse, we will disable their infrastructure until compliance is achieved. The Kravasi war chief added his support. My warriors are ready. The humans fight well, but they are outnumbered 10 to 1. This will be over quickly. The vote began. Species after species activated their consent lights. Green filled the chamber as the count climbed. 20 species, 25, 30. Then the Silmari representative stood, her light dimming to nearly nothing. I abstain. Shocked silence fell over the chamber. On what grounds? Velther demanded. On the grounds that I have spent the last 3 days consulting with our medical council about the human-adapted inhibitors. They work. Better than ours do, in fact. I cannot in good conscience vote to destroy technology that could help my people. The Xanthus representative's crystalline structure chimed softly. I also abstain. The humans are correct that K-Thuran monopoly on neural technology has stifled innovation for too long. Velther's mandibles clicked frantically. You would betray the Council over market considerations? I would prioritize my people's well-being over your pride, the Zenthus replied. 3 more species abstained. Then 2 more voted against military action entirely. The count stalled at 32 in favor, not enough for the unanimous decision that council military operations required. The blockade would proceed anyway. Velther made sure of that. 12 species was still more than enough to contain humanity. The fleet assembled at the Threshold Gate, the main jump point into human space. Thousands of ships gathered, representing the galaxy's finest military forces. Ambassador Liu arrived in a single diplomatic vessel, unarmed and unescorted. She requested permission to address the fleet commanders before hostilities began. Velther granted it, confident that no words could change what was coming. Liu stood in the command ship's bridge, surrounded by alien commanders from a dozen different species. She looked small and fragile among them, but her voice carried clearly. "I'm here to give you one chance to reconsider," she said. The Kovasi war chief laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "You stand before the greatest fleet ever assembled and offer us a chance? Your arrogance is remarkable." "Not arrogance," Liu replied. "Mathematics. You see 12 species and thousands of ships. I see 12 species who don't know what they're really fighting." She activated a holographic display. It showed human military deployments across their territory. The numbers were smaller than the assembled fleet, but the formations were unusual. Human ships were scattered across dozens of systems in patterns that made no defensive sense. "We've known this was coming for weeks," Liu explained. "So we've been preparing. Not for a defensive war, but for something else entirely." Velther studied the display, trying to understand the tactical error he was seeing. "You've left your core systems exposed. This deployment makes no sense. It makes perfect sense if you understand what we've become." Liu touched her neck port, and her expression shifted to something that might have been sadness. "You think we're defending our territory. We're not. We're proving a point." The battle began 3 hours later. The fleet advanced into human space, expecting resistance at the border. Instead, human ships retreated, drawing the fleet deeper. It seemed like victory until the Kovasi war chief realized they were being led into a trap. But it wasn't a military trap. It was a demonstration. Human ships began fighting with a coordination no fleet had ever achieved. Crews toggled their inhibitors in perfect synchronization, switching from defensive caution to aggressive assault and back again in seconds. They anticipated enemy movements not through superior technology, but through controlled emotional intelligence, reading their opponent's tactical psychology while revealing nothing of their own. The fleet commanders watched their formations dissolve under pressure that shouldn't have been possible from a smaller force. Human pilots flew with inhuman precision when they needed it, then switched to chaotic unpredictability that no tactical computer could model. Human gunners dialed down all emotional response to make impossible shots, then ramped up aggression to press advantages. It was like fighting an enemy that could be whatever it needed to be at any moment. 3 days into the battle, the Kovasi war chief watched a single human cruiser disable 4 of his dreadnoughts, using tactics that shifted every few minutes. He sent a private message to his homeworld. "We cannot win this. They are not one species. They are 1,000 different species depending on what the moment requires." On the 5th day, the human fleet stopped retreating. Commander James Rodriguez, now an admiral, led the counterattack. His ships moved through the fleet with surgical precision, disabling vessels but never destroying them. Every crippled ship received immediate rescue support from the same humans who had just attacked it. The fleet commanders couldn't understand it. The humans fought with savage efficiency, then treated their defeated enemies with compassionate care. They could kill without hesitation when necessary, then switch immediately to mercy when it wasn't. On the 8th day, Velther received an emergency transmission from his homeworld. Human medical teams had arrived offering aid after a natural disaster struck the Catharen colonies. They were already saving thousands of lives, asking nothing in return. The same species they were fighting was simultaneously helping them. Liu appeared on the command ship's view screen. Do you understand now? We can choose to be warriors or healers, conquerors or partners, whatever each moment demands. You didn't teach us to suppress our humanity. You gave us the ability to choose when and how to express it. The Corvassi war chief growled. You're showing off, proving you can fight and heal simultaneously. We're proving we can be trusted with power, Liu corrected. Yes, we could use our abilities to conquer. We could turn off mercy and empathy and sweep across the galaxy. But we choose not to. That choice, made freely by beings who could choose anything else, is the difference between civilized species and dangerous ones. On the 12th day, the fleet withdrew. Not because they were defeated militarily, though the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. They withdrew because half the species involved sent word that human medical teams were helping their colonies. Human traders were honoring old contracts despite the war. And human diplomats were still negotiating peace terms in good faith. You couldn't hate an enemy that fought you with one hand and healed your children with the other. The Galactic Council reconvened in its shattered chambers. 6 species had switched sides during the conflict. 8 more demanded access to human-adapted inhibitor technology. The Catharen monopoly was broken forever. Ambassador Liu addressed them one final time. You taught us to control pain because you thought it would civilize us. You were right, just not in the way you expected. We learned that control itself is what makes us civilized. Not the absence of emotion, but the choice of how to use it. She gestured to the waiting representatives. Now we offer that choice to you. We'll share our technology freely with any species that wants it. But understand what you're accepting. The ability to choose your emotions means accepting responsibility for every choice you make. There's no hiding behind instinct anymore. Every act of cruelty will be chosen. Every act of kindness will be earned. The Silmari delegate was the first to speak. And if we become like you? If we learn to weaponize our feelings? Liu's smile was genuine, because she chose for it to be. Then you'll also learn what we learned. That the hardest choice is choosing to be kind when you could easily be cruel. That real strength isn't the ability to turn off your conscience, but the discipline to turn it back on. You gave us the power to transcend pain. We're giving you the chance to transcend yourselves. 50 years later, historians would study this moment as the turning point. Species across the galaxy began adapting human inhibitor technology, learning to master their emotional states. Some used it wisely. Others didn't. But all of them understood that humanity had changed the rules of galactic civilization forever. The Catharen eventually apologized, in their way. Velthar met Ambassador Liu decades later, both of them old and decorated with honors from a dozen worlds. We thought we were teaching you to be more like us, he admitted. Liu nodded. Instead, you taught us to be more deliberately ourselves. That gift, despite your intentions, might be the most valuable thing any species has ever given humanity. She touched her inhibitor port one last time. You taught us to control pain. We learned to control everything that makes us human. And then we chose to stay human anyway. That choice defines us now. That choice is what we'll be teaching the galaxy for generations to come. The galaxy would debate for centuries whether to celebrate or regret teaching humanity that lesson. But one truth became undeniable. The species that learned to choose its own nature would shape the future of all species that came after.